The great English-American thinker Thomas Paine once said, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." This sentiment was not new. However, the ability to speak such political heresy had been met with both enthusiasm and distaste. The days of divine right monarchy were dwindling, and perhaps unintentionally from monarchic decisions, the days of representative republic were born anew. The period of time between 1775 and 1991 was rife with struggle, as all human history has been. However, the winds of change blew firmly away from the stony, moated castle and toward the downtrodden tavern and the sprawling plantation, beginning with the bourgeois revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries, then continuing through to the proletarian editions of the 20th. This video essay will be exploring the lives and works of Thomas Paine and Karl Marx in relation to their justifications for political revolution, the revolutions they inspired, and their consequences. Thomas Paine was born in Norfolk, England in 1737 and journeyed around the country until finding himself in the town of Lewes in Sussex. It was here where Paine first documented flirting with revolutionary thought, given the town's well-known Republican sentiment at the time. He eventually found his way to London, where he met Benjamin Franklin, the American revolutionary and diplomat representing the colony of Pennsylvania. The two became good friends, and Franklin convinced Paine to emigrate from England to the British colonies in North America and continue his revolutionary work there. After the voyage, during which Paine nearly succumbed to typhoid, he began his work with advocating for the abolition of slavery. Having made a name for himself in the pro-revolution scene of Philadelphia, and in the relative safety of being an ocean away, he officially embarked on arguably the most important and radicalizing work of the American struggle against the Kingdom of Great Britain, the pamphlet called Common Sense. Thomas Paine stressed that the colonies, which were under the rule of the King of England and the Parliament of Great Britain, had every right to self-governance. He venomously contended that the British assertion that their idea of ownership of the colonies was not only false, but morally and ethically reprehensible. Paine suggested that the people not only have the right to revolution, but the obligation to seek a better existence for themselves, their families, and their countrymen alike. He went on to explain that while revolution may be necessary, it will not be easy, and will, in fact, require constant maintenance, and everyone will need to participate in the work for the upkeep of the new society. Absolute governance is simple, Paine posited. When the inevitable crises arise, the blame will always lie with the decisions and decrees of the head of society or government in question. The Rights of Man, Paine's first major work in the years following the American Revolution, he spoke on the nature of precedent. He stated that, while not inherently bad, precedent can be used in generally negative ways. This was written in criticism of post-revolutionary America's reliance on the old ways of life in the construction of their new laws and constitution. He ostensibly commends the French, perhaps prematurely, for abandoning their prior sensibilities in favor of new ideas, including his own. In the Age of Reason, Paine declared that his ideal revolution should be irreligious in nature as to not dilute the cause of freedom, and thus, ability of all people within the new state to practice their own faith freely. Paine's work has been immensely influential throughout much of the Western world and has influenced a great many revolutionaries. Similar to Paine, Karl Marx saw great injustice during his lifetime. Born in 1818 to a moderately wealthy family, Marx grew up rather comfortably in the Rhineland of the Kingdom of Prussia. While little may be known of his childhood, his university days have been well documented. While studying law at the University of Bonn, Marx became intrigued by the philosophical discussions that were being held in the local bars. It was here that he began debating fiercely with his fellow students and members of the local drinking clubs. As his studies began taking a turn for the worse, his father insisted that he move to the much more academically rigorous University of Berlin. After his move to Berlin, his studies improved, and he proposed to his future wife Jenny. Owing to her status as a member of the Prussian nobility and Marx's status as a commoner, Marx began to conjecture about the nature of class. In Berlin, Marx studied the works of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel's leftist perspective on the nature of the world had an incredible influence on the thinking of Marx and his contemporaries. It was after he relocated to Cologne that Marx really began advocating for socialism in the Rhineland News. The Prussian authorities were vehemently opposed to the sentiments expressed in these publications and prevented many of them from being released. It is because of this that Marx decided to once again move. Now in Paris, Marx would again write for and edit a radical newspaper. He met Friedrich Engels, who financed much of Marx's work and with whom he shared a friendship until his death. Marx would move 2 more times before finally settling in London, where he would spend most of the rest of his life, and publish much of his most lasting work on the nature of politics, economics, and the state. Karl Marx published several works with the main focus being critiquing capitalism and its detrimental effects on the working class. In the manifesto of the Communist Party, Marx's use of the language, or presumed language, of the bourgeoisie or owning class is intensely inflammatory and was purposefully chosen to spark anger and further distrust in the average worker. He called for the proletariat, or the working class, to begin actively fighting with the upper class, which he termed the battle of democracy. This violent form of democracy, Marx explained, is the only way to wrestle control of the economy and the state from the bourgeoisie, as they would never agree to relinquish power willingly. In fact, they would use the power of the state to protect themselves and their interests. As he explains in Capital, the French aristocracy during the revolution against themselves attempted to strip the masses of their right to assemble, and in doing so, greatly exacerbated the ire of the French peasantry. Shortly after releasing the Communist Manifesto, Marx published The Class Struggles in France, where he deliberated on how revolution can be hijacked by opportunistic actors. Jacques Lafitte, Prime Minister of the French Republic and banker himself, sought to reimagine the French Republic as being ruled by the moneyed interests of the capitalists and bankers, thus undermining the revolutionary attitudes of the French people and using them for the heavy lifting for the overthrow of any government. The works of Thomas Paine and Karl Marx have been highly influential ever since they were published. Paine's writings and ideas have been used to inspire multiple revolutions in the Americas and Europe alike. His writings have been translated into multiple languages, particularly Spanish, which led José Herficio Artigas, the Uruguayan revolutionary, to call for insurrection against Argentina and the founding of a separate nation north of the Rio de la Plata. Paine and his ideology have created much of the political philosophy of what we call the West. Marx, on the other hand, has been incredibly influential in the East. Beginning in the Russian Empire, Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik Party implored the peasantry for a communist revolution. In his book State and Revolution, Lenin expounded on Marx's idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat by stating that the same proletariat should become the ruling class after the revolution. In addition to the Soviet Union, many Far Eastern nations adopted the philosophy of Marx, such as China, Vietnam, North Korea, and many more. Another main difference between the ideas of Paine and Marx is the history of where they individually took hold. Paine's idea has been popular in non-colonized and settler states, while Marx's work has been adopted in colonized states in Asia, Africa, and South America. One person who was influenced by both Paine and Marx was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln wrote extensively about Paine, and has even been noted as espousing a belief that labor should be valued over that of capital. To conclude, the idea of revolution is one that is inherently tied to the desire for a better life. This can be flawed, such as what Marx described with the French bankers in the class struggles of France, or it can be good, such as what Paine urged for in the British North American colonies. There is no perfect revolution, nor is there a perfect outcome. They both justified their ideas of revolution as a cause for the greater good, and necessary to move beyond the status quo. For Paine, the status quo being unjust British rule and taxation in the Americas, and for Marx, the exploitation of the working class by the owners of farms and factories was deplorable, and as such was enough justification for violent revolution. In that vein, any revolution could be considered justified if it seeks to remove observable injustice from a society. This could obviously be unfortunately used to attempt justification for clear power grabs, such as the numerous coups in South America and Africa, which most people have considered unjustified. A truly justified revolution must come from the will of the people within a single society and be for the benefit of all, or at least a large majority of the people, and must be for altruistic reasons.